Good morning, Moray Rabotai. We are continuing on Masechet Avodah Zarah, and we are holding on Daf Yud Amud Aleph in the middle of the Amud by 2 dots. Today's Amud is being learned. The Schul Yeshua ben Diana, Yal ben Rivka, Menashe ben Asi. Today's Amud is also being learned. Le'ilu Nishmat Zipporah bad Yitzchak, and we're back now to the discussion that we had in the Mishnah of enumerating the Chagim, the holidays of the Goyim, and the Mishnah counted V'yom Genusya shel Malchehem, the day of Genusya of their kings. So says the Gemara, what is the day of Genusya? Amar Rav Yehuda, Yom Shema'amidim bo Ovdei Kochavim et Malkam. That's the day of the nomination of their kings. When a new king is nominated, when he is anointed to be the king, that day will be forever in his lifetime as a king. He will make a tremendous holiday party for the entire country, and it involves Avodah Zarah, of course, and therefore that is counted as one of the chagas of the Goyim, one of the holidays of the Akum, as the day of Avodah Zarah. So says the Gemara, that can't be, because what you're saying is it's the day that they become a king. V'hatanya yom genusya v'yom shema'amidim bahem et malkam. In the Braita we have Yom Genusya mentioned together with a day of the nomination of the new king. So you can't really say that Yom Genusya is the day of the nomination, right? So says the Gemara, Lo kasha, that's not the question. Hadideh hadebre. One of them, both of them are the days that the new king is anointed, is nominated to the new position as the emperor, as the king. But one of them is for the king himself. But sometimes you have the great zchut for the king to see in his lifetime his own son being appointed as a king in his stead. And that's a great simcha as well. As we will see, the Romans did not have an automatic system that if you're the son, you will become the king afterwards. They had, like the Tosafot says, they had a senate of 300 zekenim, and they would make decisions. The Gdolei Romi, and as you'll see, even the emperor himself had limited power within the government. So it was not necessarily automatic that the son of the king becomes the next king. And actually, most time it did not happen like that, as we will see in the Gemara, and therefore when it did happen, that was a big deal, and that would be a tremendous simcha for the king, and he would set that up also as a day of holiday. So it will be his own anniversary of him becoming a king years before, and it will be also a new one for the day that his son in his lifetime became the king. So, meaning not the king instead of him yet, but they will put him as the new king, and he would still be a king emeritus. He would be still the official king, as his son is learning, Tachsisei Melucha, is learning to become fitted for the job, becoming the next king. So in that period, it will be him and his son being the kings. And that would be a tremendous simcha for him. He would set that up also as a chaga, as a so-called holiday for the goyim, which would involve Avodah Zarah as well. Now, the Gemara is going to ask a question on this. The Gemara is going to momentarily fall off these and bring a different pshat. Gemara is going to disprove the other pshat and come back to this and answer the question on it. So this is what we're going to end up with, but we're going to go through a loop and come back. Says the Gemara, Omi mukmi malka bar malka. Since when the Romans would appoint a son after a father as king? They don't do that. V'atani Rabbi Yosef, hine katon nataticha begoyim. The pasuk says about the Romans, Hashem says, I have made you the smallest of the nations. Katon nataticha begoyim. She'en moshivin melech ben melech. What's the pshat by Gaton Netaticha Bagoyim? The pshat is that they don't have a continuity of Malchut. The son and the father, they don't follow. The Malchut of the son does not follow the father. So says the Gemara, Bazu yata me'ot. This is the end of the pasuk. This is the pasuk in Ovadia. Ovadia is only one perek, is actually speaking about the downfall of Edom. But the entire chapter, the entire Nevuah of Ovadia, speaks about Edom. And in the very beginning, in Pasuk Bet, it says, Hine katon etaticha bagoyim bazu yata meod. I have made you the smallest of the nations, and you are very disgraced. Right? So the Gemara discusses both the parts of the Pasuk. Katon etaticha bagoyim she'en moshivin melech ben melech. That's why they are katon. That their malchut is never great. The malchut is great when you have a shalshelet of melucha. You have like David HaMelech was promised that if you behave, I will make sure that no one of your children and your generations after will be cut off from your throne. There's a tremendous benefit to having that if it's not misused, and that's exactly what Hashem says. If you don't misuse your power, you will have a continued melucha. So if someone doesn't have that, it's considered katon. Now, that has nothing to do with why would you be katon? So Khatam Sofer says basically, this is the Romans had a system. The system of appointing the most fitted king is not necessarily a bad system, right? You choose. Sometimes the son is not as good. So sometimes he's someone that is going to be power hungry and is going to destroy the whole melucha. So it's not a bad thing. So why is that a bad thing about Edom? It's their system, says the Khatam Sofer. Khatam Sofer says no. Really, they had the system, and the system dictated that if you have a son that's fit for being the next king, we'll have the son. If not, the Senate would decide who is going to be fit for being the next king. And the klala is, they were so katon that oftentimes, almost always, the son was not fit, and the melucha was cut off. Every generation was cut off, a new king. Cut off, a new king. So that's the description of Ovadiyahu about Edom. Katon ata, katon netaticha, is that you won't have continuity. That means your son would not be fit for being a melech, and it will be another one, and then his son would not be fit, and so on. That is the description of the pasuk in Ovadiyahu. Be that as it may, says the Gemara, what's bazuyata meod that you're very disgraced? She'en lahen lo ktav velo lashon. They don't have their own writing. They don't have their own language. Really, as understanding this simply would be because, as we mentioned before, Rome really continued the Greek philosophy, culture, and language. So they didn't have really their own innovation of language and culture. It was all taken from Greeks, right? So that's simple. The Ben Ish Chai and Ben Yoyada says something fascinating. He says this is Esav, as we'll discuss in just a moment. And by Esav, what was the description of the pasuk by Esav? That he was Said Bepiv. He would trick people with his mouth, right? And his hands were not doing chesed or anything else necessarily. It was not intellectual endeavor. It was really al charbecha tichyeh, that you will live on your sword. So hands are busy with sword, and mouth is busy with trickster activities, and therefore he's missing those two things: the ktav, the writing, which is done with the hand, and the lashon, the language, which is with the mouth, would be lakui, would be diminished in this way of the klalat, a fascinating, ingenious way of understanding the klala of Edom, referring back to their source of being Esav. Now, once we say this is very interesting because Edom and Rome are not the same. Esav is Edom. Esav or Edom. Now we know. But Edom is in the Middle East. It's not, nothing to do with Europe. It has nothing to do with what we know as Rome. Right? And yet, in all the Gemarot that we had and all the Gemarot that we will have, you see clearly that the Pasuk and the Gemara refers to Edom as Esav. And Edom is the same thing as Rome in the Gemara. So how is that possible? So Ramban writes, this is Ramban on Chumash, but mainly Ramban in his Ktavim, Ramban writes that the way it happened was that the Sefor ben Elipaz was the first king in Edom. And then by Romans who became Notzri, the Romans, they're the first ones who embraced the dat of Notzrim, and a lot of which is the dat of the Edomites, Edom and Esav is Natsrut, and the Romans are the first ones who really developed that, and therefore that became their mahut. And then Ramban says, additionally, many of the Edomites also moved to Rome afterwards. So it's two elements. Now, it's amazing that both of these elements are mentioned in different places by the Vilna Gaon. Tremendous. The Vilna Gaon writes, for instance, by the Shiv'im Barim, the 70 korbanot that we will bring in Chag HaSukkot, which the Gemara says it's corresponding with the 70 umot. So the Vilna Gaon writes that really two kochot of the umot in the world is Esav and Ishmael, and he proves how in an unbelievable way, really amazing, how 35 of these are written differently than the other 35, and he says that this is 35 corresponding to the kochot of Esav, and 35 corresponding to the kochot of Ishmael. And the Vilna Gaon says, wait a second, but they're not necessarily all the umot, even the Ishmael, like the Persians, for instance, or they're not Ishmaelim. They're not Ishmaelim, but he says, but once you join a nation and you sign up for their mentality and what they stand for in the world, you become part of that as well. So that's one Vilna Gaon. But the more fascinating Vilna Gaon is in Esther. Vilna Gaon writes in his Perush on Esther something fascinating. He says, when Sancheriv bilbelet kol ha'olam, Sancheriv, the Assyrian king, he was notorious fighter. He was a tremendous king and warrior. He won every battle until, of course, he got to Yerushalayim, and all of his, in the time of Chizkiyahu HaMelech, and all of his army died. And Leil Pesach this was. Chizkiyahu didn't even have a proper army because he was focused, his entire koach was focused on making people learn Torah, and everyone was a Talmid Chacham, but they didn't have an army, the trained army. And when Sancheriv heard about Yerushalayim in the beginning, he heard that there's this city that no one could conquer, it's impregnable, and therefore he never bothered even going there until he had conquered all of the other residential parts of the region, the area. He says, oh, let me go just to see what is this impregnable Yerushalayim that they talk about. He went and he saw Yerushalayim. It's a very small city, relatively speaking, if you talk about the Ir Atika. And he says, this is a piece of cake. We gotta do this, lunch in Yerushalayim, as Nasser said. So it was gonna go surround the city, lay siege, and tomorrow morning we're gonna go destroy it. And they did. It was 180,000+ soldiers, according to the Midrash. These are only the generals of his army. Tremendous, massive trained army that he had, and all of them died overnight. And Malach killed all of them aside from himself and his two sons and few others. And he made the neder that he's going to bring his two sons as a korban to his Avodah Zarah if he makes it home alive, which there was a oops over there. His sons heard this, and then they killed him on the way. And that was the end of Sancheriv. But before that, Sancheriv was a tremendous king. One of the tactics that he had was, when he conquered a country, he would not let them live in their own place, because you become too comfortable too quickly after you're conquered, and you go back to your mentality. Is a genius thing. He would make them exile them to different places and switch around everything. This way, everyone is in galut, and until they get used to the language and to the new place and build houses and whatnot, they already forgot about rebelling, and their kids are second generation subservient to Sancheriv, and that would be amazing. That was his thing. So bilbelet kol ha'umot, and the Gemara says we don't know where he took people. The Gemara that we had together was about a ger Amaleki that came there, right? This is Gemara in Brachot Chafchet, and he wanted to become a ger, and they let him because Sancheriv bilbelet kol ha'umot. So says the Gaon, this is fascinating. Says the Gaon, you know where he took the Edomites when he conquered Edom, which is Esav? He took them to Rome. So therefore, Edomites are in Rome. So that's like fascinating. Not just that they signed up for the mentality, but as the Ramban says, both of this, Beruach Kodsho, hundreds of years before the Gaon, says they actually moved from Edom to Rome, and therefore, when we talk about Rome, we're talking about Esav, we're talking about Edom. So that's a fascinating piece of information. Actually, one of the most famous tshuvot of Rabbi Yaakov Emden, the son of the Chacham Tzvi in Shelat Yabetz, was asked about the Italian potential Ger Tzedek that wanted to convert to Judaism, and he was asked. And he actually was machmir lechatchila that because Italy, Edom is Rome, and that is Edom, right? So Ger Edomi and Mitzri have a restriction of 3 generations that he can't marry a Jew until then. So he wanted to relate that to the fact that their source is really from Edom. In Rome, and therefore it will be that restriction over there, which is a fascinating thing. So says the Gemara. They don't do that. They don't sit the son of the king as the next king, and because they don't have their own language, they have their own katav. So it says the Gemara, therefore, we got to momentarily fall off of this and then come back to this again. Yom Genusya, Yom Haleda. Yom Genusya means the birthday. The birthday of the king would be a big deal. And that would be a party day, a so-called Yom Chaga, a so-called holiday, and it would involve Avodah Zarah. So it says the Gemara, Yom Genusya, Yom Haleda. You can't say that either because another braita says Yom Genusya, Yom Haleda. So it can't be that they're one and the same. It's Yom Genusya and the birthday. So it can't be that Genusya means birthday. Says the Gemara, Lo kasha, that's not the question. Hadideh, hadibure. We could say the same answer over here, that one of them is his birthday, one of them is his son. Finally, he had a son after 5 girls. That would be a big simcha, and that would be Yom Simcha of the Leda of the Ben. So says the Gemara, V'yom haleda shelo, v'yom haleda shel beno. Says the Gemara, there's another braita that contradicts this, because it says Yom genusya shelo v'yom genusya shel beno, Yom haleda shelo v'yom haleda shel beno. So that completely ties your hand in your back, because it says 4 things in the braita. It says his Yom genusya, his son's Yom genusya, his Yom leda, his son's Yom Leda, so you certainly cannot say that Yom Genusya means Yom Leda. That's or completely contradicted from this braita. Ela, but the Gemara says we go back to the original understanding. Ma Yom Genusya, Yom Shma'amadim Bo Malkam. It is the day of the nomination of the king. Velo kasha, and you had the questions last narrow line. Hadideh, hadebreh is not a question how you have Genusya of himself and then you say Yom Shema'amidim Bo Melech, because one of them is his nomination as a king, and the other one is when in his lifetime he's zochet to have his son being appointed as the next king. And instead, that would be also an additional Yom Simcha for him. And you want to ask, you want to ask how come this could be even possible in Rome, because in Rome they don't appoint a king as the son of the previous king. Says the Gemara, it's not impossible. It just normally doesn't happen. But al yedeh she'ela mukmi. But if it's requested by the king, if it's asked and if it's put in the system and it's fit, then they do it. Kegon Asvirus bar Antoninos. The example of it is the son of our very famous Antoninos, the Roman Empire, who was the king of Rome, and his son Asvirus became a king after him as well. So says the Gemara, how does this work? Now, of course, we know Antoninos from around Shas and in Rashi, when Rivka Imenu was pregnant, and she had a conflict, not knowing that she's carrying twins, and Bet Avodah Zarah it would kick, Bet Midrash it would kick, and she was very conflicted, and she went to ask from the yeshiva of Shem Ve'ever, right, Lidrosh et Hashem, and they told him, oh, no problem. Shnei goyim bebitnech u'shnei leumim me'ayich yiparedu u'leom me'leom yematz v'rav yavot tza'ir. So you're carrying twins, and shnei goyim, two nations, are going to be coming from this pregnancy. Is one of them is this way, the other one is that way. V'rav yavot tza'ir, and the older one would be subservient to the younger one. And the Gemara says, don't read goyim, but shnei geim. And shnei geim, they mean two aristocrats. And that, the Gemara says, ze Rabbi ve'Antoninos, which is a fascinating talk by itself, how really the Hashgacha of Hashem had the plans would have been, and this is what Yitzchak Avinu thought, that Esav is a conqueror, is a leader, is a builder, and he would be a fighter, and he would be the one leading the world, and Yaakov would be supported by him, being the spiritual element, like a Yisachar ve'Zevulun type of thing, like Shevet Levi and the rest of the Shvatim type of thing. That would be the original thing, and each one of them had their batzuk. That was supposed to be the continuity of the Jewish nation, conquering not the world, but in having the elements of the worldly leadership, and together with the spiritual leadership. Esav, of course, messed up and destroyed that equilibrium, and therefore Yaakov had to take over both elements now of working, whereas he was sitting in Bet Midrash, Ishtam Yoshev Alim, now he had to become Bechol Kochi Avati Et Avichem, but he also had to now marry the Batzug of Esav, because Esav is out of the picture, hence the whole Mesabeb Sivot of HaKadosh Baruch Hu for him to marry Leah, and the king actually does not come from Rachel, comes from Leah, because that would be the portion of leadership in the world, and so on. It's a fascinating talk with many, many details fitting into place. Really remarkable thought that you could have about it. But really the perfect example of how that would work together would be Rabbi ve'Antoninos. Therefore, this was set already into motion from before of Shnei Goyim bebitnech, that there's going to be a generation of the fulfillment of this nevuah of Shnei Goyim bebitnech, Shnei Goyim bebitnech. Rabbi ve'Antoninos, one of them the king of Torah, the other one the king of the world in that time, and the fascinating cooperation that they have together, as the Gemara is going to say. So says the Gemara, Amar le Antoninos le Rabbi. Antoninos told Rabbi, Ba'ina de yimloch asveros beri tachoti. I want to somehow cause my son to be the emperor after me. How do I do that? But it's not only that. I also want something else. V'ta'avid teveria kalanya. I also want Teveria to become kalanya. Well, which means it should be patur from taxes. Bat chorin, says Rashi, shelo titen mas leolam. It will be forever patur from paying taxes. All the Jews will be living in Teveria. It will be amazing. So I want to do these two things because I realize, back then was not tuition that was backbreaking. It was taxes, right? You take taxes away from the Jews, everyone would be rich and everyone would be living properly. So the biggest financial help that he could extend to the Jewish community was, I'm going to take taxes away and it will be good, right? So says the Gemara, he says, I know that I have one bite on an apple. I could ask one of them, but I can't ask the other one. And look at how much he loved the Jews. He says, I'm conflicted. On one hand, I want my son to become the emperor, but that's not such a meaningful thing to do. The meaningful thing to do is to help the Jews. And I want to do this. I want to make that Teveria forever, not for 5 years, 10 years, forever will be patur from taxes. So how do I do this? So Rebbe did not want to answer these questions because these are highly controversial, politically dangerous and explosive questions. And he was afraid maybe there's spies, maybe someone is hearing, you never know. So Rebbe answered all of his questions with parables and with acts that, again, he was the emperor of Rome. He must have been extremely, extremely brilliant. And he would understand what Rebbe is hinting to him. So what he did was like this. He brought a person, he put him on the shoulders of another person, and he gave a bird, a pigeon, to the top one, in his hands. Ve'amar le'letata, and he told to the bottom one, Amor le'ila le'mifrach min yedeh Yonah. Tell, meaning he told the bottom one, tell the top one to let the Yonah go. So what does that mean? Of course, he was hinting the Yonah is the Jews, right? That are in the hand of the top one. But there's a bottom one that's telling the top one what to do. So in other words, he was telling him, ask the Roman government to put your son in your stead. And tell your son that the one thing that he's going to ask for is going to be to set Tiberia free for taxes. This way you get both of them. Now, the Jews may have to wait a decade or two for that to happen, but it will happen. So that's what he was telling him without saying a word. So says the Gemara, Amar, so Antoninos chap what he was saying. He said, Shmamina, hachikamali. He said, I understand. Rebbe is telling me, at bai minayhu da'asveres beri yimloch tachotoi, that the son should be a king in my stead afterwards. Ve'emaleh la'asviros, and you tell your son that here he says, I am putting you as a king. It wouldn't happen without me. Now that I'm making you the emperor after me, here is the first thing you're going to ask for. The most important mission you have in your malchut is the Tavit Tiberia Kalanya, that you ask for Tiberia to be exempt from taxes. It says the Gemara, Amale, another etzah that he wanted to ask from Rebbe was Mesari le Chashuvi Romai. The Senate people, some of the people in the government of Rome, they bother me. They make trouble. What do I do? It's pretty frustrating, right? Again, the king of Rome, as much as we mentioned before, it was not like other kingdoms. As much as he had power and he was the emperor and all of that, at the end of the day, he was under control of the Senate. He was run by Gidolei Romi, and there's always, when you have 300 people, you'll have, as good as you may be, you'll always have those people who are not happy and they'll make trouble. So he was venting to Rebbe. He said, what do I do with this? I have people who are plotting against me. They're trying to make trouble always and so on. What do I do? So this is, even if you think the previous one was explosive, this is like super explosive. So what does he do? He takes him, he says nothing. It's like every day he would take him to the Gina. He would take him to a garden, and he would uproot one plant every day and throw it away. Next day he would uproot another plant and throw it away without saying a word. So says the Gemara, Amar Shmamina, Antonius chap what he was trying to say. He says, Shmamina hachikamarli. So you know what he's telling me? He says, At ketol chad minayhu velo titgare behu bekulhu. It says, do not oppose them, all of them together, because that would be too much of a trouble. One by one, you get rid of each one of them methodically and not to take them all on at once, and this would be your malchut. So that's the etzah that he gave him. So says the Gemara, Gemara says, what burns if you just tell it to him? Like he asks a question, just answer him. Why you have to do a whole presentation and take him to the garden? Says the Gemara, why can't he just memar behedya? Says the Gemara, Amar Sham chashuv romi u'masaru le. Says if the chashuv romi here, if the Romans, this leaks somewhere, then they're going to actually kill him or bother him more even, and it's going to become trouble for Antoninos. So says Gemara, and just whisper it to his ears. Why can't you just quietly tell him? Mishum dichtiv, because the pasuk says, Ki ofa shamayim yolich et hakol. There is oznaim lekotel, as they say, right? The things that could be heard could be leaked. You never know who's listening. You never know what things are going to be said over. So therefore, he did not want any words to be involved with this. Says the Gemara, another question that he asked was, Havale hahu brata. Antoninus had a daughter, the Shma Gira. The name of the daughter was Gira. Okay. Ka'avda Isura. She, unfortunately, was connected with the wrong people, and she started doing immorality, acts of promiscuous acts, and she was mezadeh. And this was not something that Antoninus was happy with. This is, talking about the world that even the goyim were mugdarim ba'arayot. This was not acceptable. So he asked the Rebbe, what do I do with her? This is a pretty bad embarrassment for the emperor to have such a thing going on in the house of the emperor. So it says the Gemara, Shadar le Gargira. He sent to Rebbe a Gargira. Right, which means this seed thing, but Gargira, there's a play on the name. Gar-gira. That means Gira, my daughter, went off the path, and she's mezaneh. So Rebbe, of course, understood the hint. Shadar le kusbarta. He sent a kusbarta plant, and kusbarta means kos, kill, barta, daughter. He says if she's in trouble, get her out of your house. Get her out of your Shadar le karti. He sent back to Rebbe a karti. He said, this is my only one left. If I kill her, then my zera, my continuation would be nichrat. Right? How does that work exactly with him having a son? Well, you have to discuss. Says the Gemara, Shalach le chasa. He sent him a chasa, a leaf of chasa. That means chus alea. It means have compassion on her. If you have to keep her, and that's so then you don't get rid of her. You don't kick her out. You don't get rid of her. Says the Gemara. Kol yoma habashada le dava pricha bematrata vechiti apumayhu. Every day, or commonly, he would send truckloads of sacks of wheat, but the problem is the sacks of wheat was not really wheat. It was only on top was wheat because he sent it with Roman official. This was the emperor's guard, basically taking this loads to the Jewish leader. So he was sending it as support to the Jewish community, the poor people, whatever it is. Rebbe is a good person to divide this among poor people. I'm sending some wheat from the castle, from the emperor to the Jewish community. It's a nice act of thing on his resume, but what he really was doing was the entire sack was filled with gold chips. There's small shreds of gold that it will be soft and so on, but on top was a portion that on the top was wheat. This was a cover basically for sending millions and millions to Rebbe on regular basis for support. So Rebbe was a billionaire himself. Rebbe was a very, very rich person. The only person comparable with the Roman emperor was Rebbe. Rebbe was tremendously rich already himself. So he says to him, Amar Dehu, he told the Roman guard, the emperor's guard, take this chitim, this wheat to Rebbe. Amar le Rebbe told Antoninus, Lo srichna, I don't need your support. Itli tuva, I have a lot already. Amar levu leman de batrach, said it should be for whoever comes after you. Again, this is a beginning of a tremendous piece after this that comes in the learning relationship that Rebbe had with Antoninus, that Be'ezrat Hashem we're going to continue this fascinating piece of Agada in the Gemara in the days to come. Chazak u'baruch.